Princess Veltara never thought she would die on such an ugly planet. Her golden transport ship, decorated with the finest crystals from 7-star systems, was now a twisted mess of metal scattered across grey rocks. Steam hissed from broken pipes while sparks flew from damaged circuits. The smell of burning electronics filled her lungs as she tried to breathe. She pressed her hand against her side, where something sharp had cut through her ceremonial robes. Blue blood stained the silver fabric. Her skin, usually glowing with soft, bioluminescent patterns that marked her royal bloodline, was growing dim. That was never a good sign for her people, the Nithril. The crash had happened so fast. One moment she was reviewing diplomatic papers for her mission to the outer colonies, sipping imported nectar from her private gardens. The next moment, alarms were screaming, and her pilot was shouting about engine failure. The emergency pods had ejected her to safety, but safety was relative when you were alone on a mining world with toxic air. Veltara tried to activate her emergency beacon, but the device was cracked and dead. Her communication implant buzzed with static. Even her personal medical scanner showed nothing but error messages. All the advanced technology that had surrounded her since birth was now useless junk. The air tasted wrong. It burned her throat and made her eyes water. Her breathing was getting harder with each passing minute. The atmospheric readings on her suit showed dangerous levels of sulfur compounds and heavy metals. Her people could survive in many environments, but this place was slowly poisoning her. She stumbled toward what remained of her ship's medical bay, hoping to find something, anything that might help. The healing pods were shattered. Medicine. Containers had spilled their contents across the floor, mixing into a useless paste. Her emergency oxygen supply hissed from a crack in its tank. Through the broken viewports, she could see the desolate landscape stretching endlessly. Dark mountains rose against a sickly yellow sky. No cities, no spaceports, no signs of civilized life anywhere. Just rocks and dust and the distant glow of mining equipment on the horizon. Her legs felt weak. The cut on her side was bleeding more now, and the toxic air was making her dizzy. She had always known she was important, always been told she was. Special, chosen by birth to lead her people. But importance meant nothing when you were dying alone on a forgotten world. The irony was bitter. She had been traveling to negotiate a trade agreement with some primitive species in the Outer Rim. The Nithrel Council had chosen her because of her diplomatic skills and her family's reputation. She was supposed to be making history, expanding their empire's influence among the lesser races. Instead, she was going to become history herself. Veltara sank to her knees as another wave of dizziness hit her. Her royal training had included many subjects: politics, art, philosophy, the proper way to address inferior species, but none of it had prepared her for this. None of it told her how to survive when all her advantages were stripped away. The emergency lights flickered and went out, leaving her in the dim glow of her own fading bioluminescence. In the growing darkness, she could hear the wind howling through the broken hull. It sounded almost like voices, like the planet itself was laughing at the proud princess who had fallen so far from her golden throne. She closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's face, wondering if anyone would ever know what happened to her. G1 had been working the night shift when his scanner picked up the energy signature. At first he thought it was just another equipment malfunction. The mining tools on this rock were always breaking down, and false readings happened more often than he cared to count. But this signal was different, too clean, too sophisticated, to be from their basic machinery. He grabbed his toolkit and headed out in the rover, following the signal across the wasteland. The yellow dust kicked up behind his vehicle as he navigated between the mining pits. After 20 minutes of driving, he saw it, twisted metal gleaming in the distance, clearly not from any human ship he recognized. The crash site was a mess. Debris scattered across 100 meters, some pieces still glowing with strange energy. But what caught his attention was the main hull section, partially intact and showing signs of life support systems. His scanner was going crazy with readings he had never seen before. G1 parked the rover and approached carefully. The metal was warm to the touch and covered in symbols that meant nothing to him. But he could hear something inside, a faint sound that might have been breathing. Someone was alive in there. He tried the obvious entry points first, but everything was sealed tight. The hull material was incredibly strong, resistant to his cutting tools. It took him nearly an hour to find a section weakened by the crash, where he could pry open a gap just wide enough to squeeze through. The inside was like nothing he had ever seen. Smooth surfaces curved in impossible ways, glowing with soft light. The air had a strange smell, sweet and metallic at the same time. And there, collapsed on what looked like a ceremonial bed, was the most unusual person he had ever encountered. Her skin was silver blue and covered in fading patterns of light. She was clearly dying. Her breathing was shallow and irregular, her lips tinged with blue that seemed wrong even for her unusual coloring. Ji-won did not need to be a doctor to recognize the signs of oxygen deprivation and poisoning. He checked his portable atmosphere reader. The air inside the ship was becoming toxic, contaminated by leaking chemicals from the crash. She needed to get out of there immediately, but she was unconscious and could not walk. Ji-won had always been practical. When equipment broke, you fixed it. When people needed help, you helped them. It did not matter if they were human or something else entirely. The ethical choice was obvious. He scooped her up in his arms, surprised by how light she felt, despite being nearly his height. Her skin was warm and had an odd texture, almost like it was generating its own energy. As soon as he touched her, the light patterns on her skin flickered more brightly for a moment, then dimmed again. The journey back to his shelter was awkward. She was larger than he had expected, and carrying an unconscious person across rough terrain was never easy. But he managed to get her to the rover and then back to his underground living quarters. His medical supplies were basic, designed for treating cuts and minor injuries, not alien poisoning. But he did what he could. He gave her oxygen from his emergency tank and tried to clean the wounds he could see. Her breathing gradually improved, and some color returned to her strange skin. When she finally opened her eyes 3 hours later, Ji-won was sitting nearby, monitoring her vital signs on his portable scanner. He smiled and started to say something. Reassuring, that was when she began screaming at him in a language he did not understand, her voice filled with rage and disgust. The patterns on her skin flared bright red, and she pulled away from him like he was made of fire. It was not exactly the thank you he had expected. The storm hit 3 days after Veltara woke up, and it changed everything. Ji-won's weather scanner started screaming warnings about plasma activity in the upper atmosphere. He had seen these storms before. They could last for weeks and fry any electronics exposed to the surface. Going outside during one was basically suicide. "We're stuck. Down here together," he told her, pointing at the readings on his screen. "The storm will kill us if we try to leave." Veltara looked at the data with obvious disgust, not at the storm, but at having to share space with him. She had spent the last 3 days making it very clear that she considered him barely above an animal. Every time he came near her, she would recoil and mutter something in her language that definitely was not a compliment. She had claimed the far corner of his shelter, as far from him as possible. She refused to eat his food, though he noticed she was getting thinner each day. When he tried to check her injuries, she would hiss at him and wave him away. It was like living with an angry, glowing cat. "Do not come within 2 meters of me, primitive," she said in her heavily accented English. "Your kind disgusts me." Ji-won just shrugged and went back to his work. He had mining quotas to meet, storm or no storm. The underground tunnels were still safe, and the automated systems needed constant maintenance. If he stopped working, they would both die when the life support failed. But Veltara seemed to think his work was beneath her notice. She spent her time trying to repair some kind of communication device from her ship, muttering complaints about the inferior materials and crude tools he had available. She acted like she was doing him a favor by breathing his air. The first week was the worst. She criticized everything: his food, his living space, his equipment, even the way he walked. According to her, humans were loud, clumsy, and smelled terrible. She made it sound like sharing space with him was the worst punishment imaginable. "Your species has barely learned to leave your planet," she said one day, while he was fixing the water recycler for the 3rd time. "How do you expect to understand advanced technology?" Ji-won looked up from his work. "This advanced technology is keeping you alive right now. That shut hurt you." peak heat for about an hour. But as the days passed, something strange started happening. Veltara would stop her own work to watch him repair things. At first, she seemed to be looking for opportunities to insult his methods, but her expression gradually changed from mockery to confusion. When the main power coupling failed on day 10, Ji-won had to rebuild it from scratch using spare parts and mining equipment. It should have been impossible. The power requirements were massive, and his tools were not designed for that kind of precision work. But he managed to jury-rig a solution that not only worked, but was actually more efficient than the original. Veltara stared at the new coupling for a long time. "This should not function," she said finally. "But it does," Ji-won replied, testing the power flow. "Sometimes the best solution is not the most complicated one." He caught her studying his work more often after that. When he reinforced the tunnel supports using a technique he had learned from Earth construction workers, she watched the entire process without saying a word. When he created a backup air filtration system from mining filters and spare fans, she actually asked him to explain how it worked. She still would not let him come near her. She still called him primitive and inferior, but there was something different in her voice now. Less certainty, more curiosity. Like maybe, just maybe, she was starting to realize that intelligence came in forms she had never expected. The storm raged on outside, but inside their little shelter, something was slowly changing between them. The crisis began on day 15, when the main life support processor started making a grinding noise that sounded like death itself. Ji-won knew that sound. It meant the filtration system was about to fail completely. Without it, they had maybe 8 hours before the air became unbreathable. Veltara looked up from her communication device as the grinding got louder. "What? Is that terrible noise?" "Our death countdown," Ji-won said calmly, already pulling tools from his kit. "The air scrubber is dying." He opened the processor housing and immediately saw the problem. The primary filter assembly had cracked, and metal shavings were destroying the secondary systems. According to the manual, this required a complete replacement unit that would take 6 weeks to order from Earth. They had 8 hours. Veltara stood behind him. Her bioluminescent patterns flickering with what he was learning meant anxiety. "Can you repair it?" "Not with proper parts," he said, studying the damage, "but maybe I can build something else." For the next 6 hours, Ji-won worked like a man possessed. He tore apart mining equipment, stripped components from his personal devices, and even cannibalized parts of his rover's engine. Veltara watched in fascination as he created something that had never existed before. He used mining drill filters as the primary scrubbers, rigged them to a circulation system built from ventilation fans, and created a control mechanism from spare computer boards. The whole thing looked like it had been assembled by someone who had never seen real technology, which, according to Veltara's people, was basically true. "This will never work," she said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "The pressure ratios are all wrong. The filtration efficiency is impossibly low. The control systems are far too primitive." Ji-won wiped sweat from his forehead and connected the final power coupling. "Maybe, but it's what we've got." He activated the system. It hummed to life with a sound completely different from the original, rougher, louder, but steady. The air quality readings slowly began to improve. His impossible creation was not just working. It was working better than the original system. Veltara stared at the readings in disbelief. "How? This violates 17 principles of atmospheric engineering." "Does it matter how it works if it keeps us alive?" Ji-won asked. But that was just the beginning. Over the following days, more systems failed, and each time Ji-won created solutions that should not have existed. When the heating system died, he built a thermal regulation network using mining equipment heat exchangers. When their water supply began running low, he created a recycling system that was 90% more efficient than anything in Veltara's engineering databases. The most impressive moment came when a power surge threatened to destroy all their electronics. Ji-won had less than an hour to build a surge protection system. Using nothing but spare wire, some mining capacitors, and circuit boards from broken equipment, he created a power management system that not only protected their equipment, but actually improved its performance. Veltara ran the calculations 3 times before she believed them. This is impossible. You have no formal engineering training. Your species has barely developed basic space travel. How are you doing this? Ji-won looked up from his work, genuinely puzzled by her confusion. I see a problem. I fix it. Isn't that what anyone would do? No, she said quietly. It is not what anyone would do. It is what humans do. That night, while Ji-won slept, Veltara accessed her people's databases again. She had always been told that humans were primitive, barely evolved creatures who had stumbled into space travel, through luck rather than intelligence. But everything she was seeing contradicted that assessment. She began to wonder what else her people had gotten wrong about these strange, adaptable creatures who turned junk into miracles. The first ships appeared on day 23, just as the plasma storm was finally dying down. Ji-won spotted them on his long-range scanner while checking the weather patterns. 3 vessels in high orbit, 2 with configurations he recognized as Nithral design, and 1 that looked like trouble. Your people are here, he told Veltara, pointing at the scanner readings. She rushed over to look, her skin patterns brightening with hope for the first time since the crash. But as she studied the data, her expression changed to something closer to fear. Those are not all my people, she said slowly. That 3rd ship, it belongs to the Kethmori Consortium. Ji-won had heard that name before in the mining stations. The Kethmori were bounty hunters, mercenaries who would capture anyone for the right price. They were not the kind of people you wanted to meet in a dark corner of space. Why would bounty hunters be interested in you? He asked. Veltara's patterns shifted to deep red, embarrassment mixed with anger. Because I am worth more as a hostage than as a princess. My father has many enemies who would pay well to see House Veltari humiliated. The situation became clear quickly. The Nithral rescue ships were maintaining a cautious distance, while the bounty hunters moved in for a closer look. It was obvious the hunters had arrived first and were now blocking any rescue attempt. Ji-won watched the tactical display and felt his stomach drop. They're sending down landing shuttles. Both sides. This is bad, Veltara said, which was the first time he had heard her admit any weakness. The Kethmori will not hesitate to kill anyone who gets in their way. Ji-won looked around his shelter, his home for the past 2 years, filled with mining equipment and jury-rigged repairs. It was not exactly built for warfare, but as he studied the approaching ships, an idea began forming in his mind. How much do you weigh? He asked suddenly. What kind of question is that? The kind that might keep us alive. I need to know if the mining charges will work. For the next hour, Ji-won turned his peaceful mining operation into a battlefield. He rigged explosive charges in the main tunnel approaches, set up tripwires connected to mining blasters, and created improvised weapons from industrial equipment. It was not pretty, but it was effective. Veltara helped, despite her obvious discomfort with the crude preparations. She used her knowledge of Kethmori tactics to predict their likely approach routes, while Ji-won planned defensive positions using the mining site's natural advantages. The attack came at dawn. 6 Kethmori soldiers in full combat armor, moving through the tunnels with military precision. They were expecting to find a helpless princess and maybe some primitive mining equipment. They were not expecting a hum. Anne, who had spent 2 years learning every inch of these tunnels. The first explosive trap took out 2 soldiers immediately. The second trap forced the survivors to take cover in a section where Ji-won had rigged a mining laser to sweep back and forth like a deadly strobe light. The remaining attackers found themselves pinned down by weapons they could not see, facing tactics they had never encountered. But the Kethmori were professionals. They adapted quickly, using their superior equipment to advance despite Ji-won's traps. As they closed in on the main shelter, one of them got a clear shot at Veltara through a gap in the tunnel wall. Ji-won saw the plasma bolt forming and did not think. He just moved, throwing himself between the weapon and its target. The bolt hit him square in the chest, burning through his work clothes and searing his skin. As he collapsed, the last thing he saw was Veltara's expression. Not disgust or superiority, but something he had never seen from her before. Pure, desperate concern for his well-being. For the first time since her rescue, she reached out and touched him willingly. Veltara's hands shook as she pressed them against Jiwon's burned chest. For the first time in her life, she was touching another being by choice, and it felt like breaking every law her people had ever made. But watching him collapse after taking that plasma bolt meant for her had shattered something inside her that was bigger than any rule. "Stay awake," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, stay awake." Jiwon's eyes were glazed with pain, but he managed a weak smile. The medical kit, under the workbench, blue container. Her hands were covered in his blood now, red human blood that looked so different from her own blue life fluid. She should have been horrified, disgusted by the contact. Instead, all she felt was desperate need to help him survive. The medical supplies were basic but functional. As she cleaned his wound and applied healing gel, she realized something strange was happening. Every time her skin touched his, her bioluminescent patterns would flicker and change. The contact was not painful or degrading like her teachers had always said. It was almost comfortable. "Why did you do that?" she asked while bandaging his chest. "Why did you jump in front of that weapon?" Jiwon winced as she tightened the bandage. "Same reason you would have done it for me." "No," she said firmly, "I would not have. My people do not sacrifice themselves for others, especially not for inferior species." "Then maybe your people are missing something important." Over the next few days, as Jiwon recovered from his injuries, Veltara found herself staying close to him. At first, she told herself it was purely practical. He needed medical attention, and she was the only one available to provide it. But she began to notice things that had nothing to do with medicine. When she checked his temperature by placing her hand on his forehead, he would relax visibly. When she helped him sit up to eat, the simple contact seemed to ease his pain in ways the medicine could not. Human touch, she realized, was not just about physical contact. It was about connection, comfort, healing. She started remembering things about her own people that she had never questioned before. Nithrel children were raised by mechanical caretakers, never held or comforted by their parents. Adults maintained formal distances, even in intimate relationships. Physical contact was reserved only for ceremonial purposes or medical emergencies. "We are taught that touch spreads weakness," she told Jiwon one evening while changing his bandages. "That physical contact makes us vulnerable to emotional contamination from lesser beings." "Sounds lonely," he said simply. It was lonely. For the first time, Veltara admitted to herself how isolated she had always felt. Her royal upbringing had been filled with luxury but empty of warmth. She had never been hugged, never held hands, never experienced the simple comfort of human contact that Jiwon seemed to take for granted. She watched him sleep that night, studying the peaceful expression on his face. Even unconscious and injured, he looked more content than she had ever felt in her palace surrounded by servants and admirers. There was something about humans that her people had completely misunderstood. The breakthrough came when Jiwon had a fever dream on his third night of recovery. He was delirious, calling out in pain and confusion. Without thinking, Veltara took his hand in both of hers, speaking softly to calm him. Her touch seemed to anchor him, bringing him back from whatever dark place his mind had wandered. As his breathing steadied and the fever broke, she realized she was still holding his hand. Her skin patterns had synchronized with his heartbeat, glowing in gentle rhythm. For the first time in her life, she felt truly connected to another living being. "Your people are not inferior," she whispered to his sleeping form. "You are everything we pretend to be but never learned how to become." 2. The Nithrel rescue fleet finally arrived in force on day 30. Their massive ships filling the sky with elegant crystalline designs that made human vessels look like flying scrap metal. Veltara watched them land through the shelter's viewport, her skin patterns shifting between excitement and something that looked almost like dread. "Your ride home is here," Jiwon said, still moving carefully because of his healing injuries. She nodded but did not seem happy about it. "Yes, my betrothed will be with them." "Betrothed?" Jiwon looked surprised. "You never mentioned that." "Lord Kavtheon of House Zelthari. We have been promised to each other since childhood. It is a political alliance between our families." Her patterns dimmed as she spoke. "He is perfect, Everything a Nithral noble should be. The way she said perfect made it sound like a disease. When the delegation arrived at their shelter, Jiwon understood immediately what she meant. Lord Cavtheon was tall and elegant, his silver skin marked with intricate royal patterns that seemed to flow like liquid metal. He moved with the kind of grace that came from a lifetime of privilege and never having to do actual work. Behind him came a squad of Nithrel guards and what looked like important officials. They all stared at Jiwon like he was some kind of exotic animal that had wandered into their path. "My beloved," Cavtheon said to Veltara, though his voice carried about as much warmth as a computer announcement. "We feared we had lost you to this primitive world." He completely ignored Jiwon, as if humans were beneath his notice entirely. But when one of the officials briefed him on the situation, his attitude changed quickly. "You are telling me," Cavtheon said slowly, his patterns flashing dangerous colors, "that this creature has been living in close proximity to my betrothed for over a month." "He saved my life," Veltara said firmly. "Twice. It has contaminated you." Cavtheon's voice was cold with disgust. "Physical contact with inferior species is forbidden by our most sacred laws. The contamination must be cleansed." "What kind of cleansing?" Jiwon asked, though he suspected he did not want to know the answer. "Execution," one of the officials said matter-of-factly. "The contaminating presence must be eliminated to restore purity." Jiwon felt his stomach drop. He had known this might happen, but hearing it stated so casually was still a shock. These people were talking about killing him like he was a piece of broken equipment. "No," Veltara said, stepping between Jiwon and the Nithrel delegation. "I forbid it." Cavtheon looked genuinely shocked. "You forbid it? You have no authority here. You are contaminated property that must be cleansed before you can resume your proper place." "Property?" Veltara's patterns flared bright red. "I am a princess of the royal blood." "You were a princess," Cavtheon corrected. "Now you are a damaged asset that requires repair. The creature dies, you undergo purification rituals, and we can salvage what remains of this political alliance." Jiwon watched Veltara's face as she processed this. Everything she had been raised to believe, everything about her identity and her future, was being stripped away because she had allowed a human to save her life. "I will not allow you to harm him," she said quietly. "You will not allow." Cavtheon laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You have no choice in this matter. Guards eliminate the contamination." The Nithril soldiers raised their weapons, elegant energy rifles that hummed with lethal power. Jiwon closed his eyes, thinking that this was a strange way to die after surviving everything else this planet had thrown at him. But Veltara moved faster than anyone expected. She placed herself directly in front of Jiwon, her arms spread wide, her skin blazing with patterns none of them had ever seen before. "If you want to kill him," she said, her voice carrying absolute conviction, "you will have to kill me first." The silence that followed was deafening. The standoff stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Veltara stood with her arms spread wide, shielding Jiwon from the raised weapons, her skin blazing with patterns that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. The Nithrel guards looked uncertain, clearly not prepared to shoot their own princess. Cavtheon's elegant features twisted with rage. "Stand aside, Veltara. You are making this situation worse." "I am making it honest," she replied, not moving an inch. "For the first time in my life, I am doing what is right instead of what is expected." "Right?" Cavtheon's voice rose to a pitch that hurt Jiwon's ears. "This primitive creature has poisoned your mind. You cannot think clearly." Behind Veltara, Jiwon struggled to his feet despite his healing injuries. The plasma burn on his chest ached, but he could not let her face this alone. "She doesn't need to protect me." "Yes, I do," Veltara said without turning around, "because this is who I choose to be now." Jiwon stepped out from behind her, moving slowly but deliberately until he stood beside her. He was not armed, not particularly threatening, just a human mining engineer in work clothes standing next to an alien princess. But something about his presence seemed to enrage Cavtheon even more. "You dare stand equal to your betters?" The Nithral Lord snarled. Your species should be grateful we allow you to exist at all. My species, G1 said calmly, would be grateful if yours learned some basic decency. The insult hit harder than any weapon could have. Several of the guards made angry sounds, and Cavthion's skin patterns flashed so brightly they were almost blinding. But G1 continued speaking, his voice steady and unafraid. You call me primitive, but I've never threatened to murder someone for saving a life. You call me inferior, but I've never treated another being like property. If this is what advanced civilization looks like, maybe we humans are better off staying primitive. Silence. Cavthion raised his own weapon, an ornate energy pistol that probably cost more than G1's entire mining operation. I will cleanse this contamination myself. Then you will have to go through me first, Veltara said, stepping closer to G1. But G1 gently moved her aside. No, if he wants to kill me for helping you, let him try. But he does it facing me, not hiding behind his guards. The challenge hung in the air like a live wire. Cavthion was clearly stronger, faster and better armed. He had every advantage except one. He had never faced someone who genuinely did not care about the consequences of doing the right thing. You would fight me? Cavthion asked, his voice filled with disbelief. A primitive against a lord of the Nithrel? If that's what it takes to protect her right to choose her own path, yes. Veltara grabbed J1's arm. Do not do this. He will kill you. Maybe, J1 admitted, but some things are worth the risk. The simple honesty in his voice seemed to break something in the tension. One of the Nithrel officials stepped forward, his patterns showing confusion rather than anger. Lord Cavthion, perhaps we should reconsider. The creature shows unexpected courage. Courage? Cavthion laughed bitterly. This is stupidity, not courage. Is it? Veltara asked, her voice carrying a new strength. Is it stupid to risk everything for someone else's freedom? Is it stupid to believe that right matters more than rank? She turned to face the entire delegation, her royal bearing returning but transformed by everything she had learned. This human has shown me what true nobility looks like. Not birth or bloodline or ceremony, but the willingness to sacrifice for others without expecting anything in return. You have been brainwashed by inferior thinking, Cavthion insisted. No, she said firmly. I have been educated by superior example. The words hit the delegation like a physical blow. To suggest that a human could provide superior anything was the ultimate heresy in their society. But as they looked at G1, injured, outgunned, facing certain death to protect someone else's right to choose, they began to see what Veltara meant. The moment that changed everything came when the youngest Nithrel guard lowered his weapon. He was barely more than a child by their standards, his skin patterns still showing the uncertainty of youth. But he looked at G1 standing there, wounded and defenseless yet unafraid, and something clicked in his mind. Lord Cavthion, the young guard said quietly, if this human is truly primitive, why does he show more honor than we do? The question rippled through the delegation like a stone dropped in still water. Other guards began to shift uncomfortably. The air weapons no longer pointed with the same certainty. Even some of the officials exchanged uncertain glances. Cavthion's rage reached a breaking point. Enough of this madness. He raised his ornate pistol directly at G1's head. I will end this contamination now. But as his finger moved toward the trigger, Veltara did something that shocked everyone present. She reached out and took G1's hand in hers, interlacing their fingers in full view of her people. Her skin patterns synchronized with his pulse, creating a light show that was both beautiful and to the Nithrel absolutely scandalous. If you kill him, she said, her voice carrying absolute conviction, you kill the only person who ever showed me what it means to be truly alive. The physical contact between them was more than just symbolic. It was revolutionary. In 30 seconds of holding hands, Veltara had just torn down thousands of years of Nithrel social structure. One of the older officials stepped forward, his patterns showing deep confusion. Princess, what are you saying? I am saying that everything we believe about superiority and contamination is wrong. She squeezed G1's hand tighter. This human taught me more about nobility in 30 days than I learned in 30 years of royal education. Impossible, Cavtheon snarled. They are barely evolved animals. Then what does that make us? Veltara asked. We, who would murder someone for showing kindness. We, who treat other beings as property. We, who have built our entire civilization on fear of connection. She turned to address the entire delegation, still holding Jiwon's hand. Look at what he did. He saved my life with no thought of reward. He shared his food when I insulted him. He worked 18-hour days to keep us both alive. He took a weapon blast meant for me without hesitation. If this is what primitives do, then maybe being primitive is something to aspire to. The young guard who had spoken earlier took another step forward. Princess, what are you proposing? I'm renouncing my title and my betrothal, she said, each word clear and final. I choose to remain here and learn from humans what we never learned from ourselves, how to live with dignity, compassion, and genuine strength. The silence that followed was deafening. Cavtheon's weapon trembled in his hand, but he seemed unable to fire it. The officials looked at each other in complete bewilderment. The guards waited for orders that never came. Finally, the eldest official spoke. Princess, if you do this, there is no returning. You will be cast out from our society permanently. Veltara looked at Jiwon, then back at her people. Good. Society that sees kindness as contamination is one I no longer wish to be part of. 3 months later, news of the human incident had spread across a dozen star systems. The story of a Nithrel princess who chose exile over executing her human rescuer became a catalyst for change throughout the galaxy. Other species began questioning their own assumptions about humanity and about each other. Veltara established the first interspecies cultural exchange center in a converted mining station, with Jiwon as her co-director. Young beings from dozens of worlds came to study human approaches to problem-solving, cooperation, and compassion. What started as a mining operation became a beacon of hope for a galaxy, learning that true advancement came not from technology or breeding, but from the simple revolutionary idea that every being deserved dignity. The HFY moment crystallized perfectly. Humanity's greatest strength was not their adaptability or stubbornness, but their fundamental belief that doing the right thing was more important than doing the easy thing.